Hello, this is John Alexis Guerra Gomez again, and this is Web Development Northeastern University, our line section. So one of the previous videos was corrupted and the image just froze, which is the JavaScript Modules video. So I'm going to try to make up from the point where we left out in there. So for that one, I think here is the code that we have on the Airbnb GitHub repository. Remember, it's basically this URL in here, John-Guerra and Airbnb demo page 3. And then here on this version on the main branch, this is kind of the latest that we have. So if I'm not mistaken, we are going to be this part in here, and especially the onCreate function that you can see in here and here. So let's take it from here. So basically the application as we have it right now will have like a bunch of listings, as you can see in here, and then we have this form that is all represented here on this HTML file. So the things I've been doing and the whole idea of these modules is that I like creating modules just by creating a function that has an object that is going to contain all the different like public elements that you want to be exposed outside of the module, and then you return that. So here I'm not even saving it, but here if I want to use these listings, then I am including the module listings that is in the listings file. In that listings file, what I have again is these function listings that is creating a listing, which is an object, and I'm just returning that listing in here, which could have like different methods and things that I want to create. Okay, so for that, the listings in here for the moment, as you can see, Copilot is very eager to come and help us. So let's shut it off for the moment. And then basically what I have in here, start from scratch, it's that I'm just using the DOM API for trying to get element by ID, the create listings form. Remember that here in our index HTML, if we search for the form that we are creating, it should be in here. Excuse me. I created an ID for that, and that's the ID that you're seeing in there. So the whole idea is that if I just come and do this, and then I just put something like listings loaded, or well, it's actually initialized up here. So I could just go and put the form in here. So if I do that, then you can even see in here that it's just printing that. So what that method does, and one of the things I was showing you in the video, is that if you want to get information about any of those methods, then you can just search MDN, JavaScript, get element by ID, or something like that, and that should take you to the correct documentation in the MDN, which has all the standards and how you're supposed to use it. And this basically tells us that this is going to return an element object, and that element object, which you can see here, the documentation, is that you see in here. And that element object, it's very nice because if you print it in there, you can actually see that is basically a variable that is linked to this element that is being rendered in here. Another way that you can access that and play with those type of things, I'm going to show in a minute, it's just by adding debugging code. Okay, so if I come in here and I just say I want to put a debugger code, and then you go back to, remember right now I have a reload browser, HTTP server running in here. So if I just refresh the page, you can see that if you're in the sources tab and this is enabled, and basically it's enabled like that, so the breakpoints are enabled, then you can stop the execution of your JavaScript code, and then you can check, for instance, what is the form variable, which is basically the one that I was printing, and then you can do all sorts of things with it. Okay. So what I want to do for the moment, let's go and restart this, is that I want to do something whenever the form is clicked or is submitted. Okay. So for that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say from the form, I want to append an event listener. And the event that I want to create, it's a submit event. The whole idea is that in here you are supposed to pass like a function that is going to be the whatever is going to be executed when the form is submitted. Now, this usually can be done here as an inline function, as you can see in there, an inline anonymous arrow function, or I can even better like just go and say I'm going to create a function and then just pass that function here. Okay, so what I'm going to do in there is that I'm going to say console log like on create function, create form or listing. And then in the previous video I was trying to just show a little pollito in there, little chick. So the whole thing in here, and then one of the things I want you to think about that it's kind of like a tricky question I like asking in my classes online, is that like think about it for a second. Where are we calling the onCreate functions? Okay, because I created the function in here, okay, and then I'm passing it in there. But then I want you to think, if I ask you, how can you call the onCreate function? Well, you can just go and do something like this, right? But then you have to add parentheses because that's the way you actually call it. But we are not really doing that. What we are doing in here is we're just passing that. So that in JavaScript, basically it's kind of like the same thing as doing this, and because in JavaScript functions are also objects, so I can assign a function into another variable and then just pass that variable to something else, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So the answer to the question is that actually we are not calling the function is just being passed to the addEventListener method, and then the browser, whenever I click on something, is going to be calling the function. Now I should be seeing this when I click here on create, but then I don't know if you notice that when I do that, it actually kind of shows up, but then also the browser kind of refresh. And if you see up here, I'm sorry, it's very slow, very small, you can see that the information from the form is actually appended into the URL. The reason why that's happening, if we go back here to the index HTML, is that I have an action in there that it's saying it doesn't have anything in the value of the action. So technically, whenever I submit on the form, it is going to just try to refresh the page and then pass the information as the URL. Okay, but we don't want that. So what we can do is that when you go and search, for instance, on the MDN for the addEventListener, that is going to take you in here and give you all the documentation. It's going to explain that the whole idea is that you have to pass either just the type and the listener or these other options that you see in here. And the listener, it's supposed to be an object that can receive a notification. So it's actually a function which is going to be following the event interface. Okay. It also says that it could be like null, or it could be something that can have the handle event method. I actually didn't know that. And then a JavaScript function. You see the beauties of using the MDN. So let's use the later, which is the event function. What that means is that I can receive an object in here, which is this event that you see in here. And then I can go and do something with that. So you can even just print it in there. And what I'm going to do, as you can see, Copilot is just waking up. I'm going to just call the prevent default method. And the prevent default method, shut up Copilot for more minutes. If you go in here, MDN, prevent default, it's going to explain to you that basically what that does is that it's going to avoid the browser from completing the typical behavior, which is to refresh. Notice that now it didn't refresh, and then it's printing the information here. Does that make sense? And again, if you want to read more information about what the prevent default method does, you can read it in here. That's why I always recommend. You can find like a bunch of examples of that. Okay. Now, the next point then, it's how can I access the information from the form? Okay. So in this part, this becomes like quite interesting because I do have this form in here. And then one of the things I can do is that I can just go and say, I'm going to create some form data, and that it's going to be like a new form data. And I'm going to be using that directly on the form. So this form data, again, we can just go and say mdn form data. I wonder if we get it with that. Hopefully it seems like we did. And then you can find some information about it. There might be like a better, like a more tutorial like for instance, using form data. And then you can see I can just create a new one, or I can pass to that specific form data, I can pass a form element, which is what I'm doing in here. When you do that, again, if we put like the debugger in there, and then I refresh this, and then I do all of these things, then I'm stopped in there, or like the execution stops in there. And then I can take that form data, notice that is lowercase, and then I can go and say, for instance, get me, I don't know, like the price, okay? And that gives me the 120. Notice also that 120 is a string, which is very typical with JavaScript forms and processing of forms, right? Okay, so what we can do in there is that if you find information about what's returning there, there is like this method that is going to give us an entries, and that's an iterator. So it's actually something that we can iterate using for let off or for off, and then or we can also just go and say I want to create an object, and the object has the method, whenever you want to create an object from something like those entries, there is a form entries method that is going to transform these into into an object. Actually, let me try this really quickly. If we try these entries, like it's an iterator, so if I want to convert it into an array, which using the spread format, then that is going to give me like an array of kind of like arrays of 2 pieces. And if you have an array of something with 2 elements like that, an array of arrays of tuples, it's not really tuples as in Python, but an arrays of 2 elements, you call this method, that is going to create an object where the first attribute is going to be the attribute or the parameter name, and the other one is the value. And that is going to give me, like, for instance, the listing. And then I just need to do from entries, and then I'm going to say form data dot entries. Okay. And then once I have done that, then the next thing I can do is that I can go and say, you know what, let me go and do append listing. And this append listing, it's going to be another method that, or another function. And then this one in here is going to take the listing information, okay? The whole idea of this one is that we want to go and then append to the DOM, like dynamically to the page. I want to create something that shows like the new listing that should be created, okay? So I can come in here and then just append the listing passing this specific listing, as you can see in there. And then I can go and just say console log, append listing, and then just pass the specific listing, refresh this, and if I do that, then now you can see that we are receiving the correct elements. In the previous video, the only thing that I had to do was just to correct that the name of this price was capital letters. Whatever, remember, in any of your inputs in your forms, whatever you put here on the name, it's going to be the value that is actually passed to the object, okay? So, so having done this, the next thing I can do is that I'm going to take a look here to the listings that I have. And then I do have this element that is this listings container, okay? And again, that's an ID. And in there I have one listing. So let's go and actually start adding other listings in there, okay? So the way we can do that is that I can go and say in here, I'm going to create the listings container, which I can get exactly using like the get element by ID. But let me just show you how you can do it using something. So one of my favorite methods from the DOM is this query selector. And query selector is like the get element by ID, but it not only works with ODDs, it also works with whatever CSS selector you can give it. So in this case, the only thing we have to say is give it like the full CSS selector, in this case with the hashtag, and that gives us what we should have, okay? Then having done that in there, what I can do is that I can go and create a new listing div, which is going to be using the create element. This is going to receive what is the type of element that I want to create. If I go and I see how I was creating my listings, then you can see that we have this div in here. Let me just paste that code in there for reference, and let me make it like this, and then just comment that out so it's not really messing with my stuff. And then if you see, we are creating like a listing div. So when you do and create this, this document create element, and I'm saying div, then I'm creating an element like this. Then if you want to change the class, so we are going to be matching that. Basically what I can do is that I just say dot class name, and I can pass in there the listing, and that is going to be 6 columns in Bootstrap. And then here there is also other attributes. Again, if you want to find more information about those things, you can just search for the element. I hope is this one. Yeah, I think it's that one. And then you can see all of the different things that you can do with an element. Like for instance, here is the inner HTML, and then you can see that there is a big warning that you shouldn't be modifying things in here. So just be very careful with that. You have to make sure that your code is valid, and then how you can modify that. In any case, the whole idea is that whatever you put in here, if I go and just say in here hola mundo, and then finally ESLint is warning me in there that I'm still not doing anything with this, I can take the parent that I have, and then in that parent I can append this new listing that I just created. So when I do that, if I come here, whatever I write in there, you can see my hola mundo. But then the next question is, like, I want to create a key cozy environment or something, and when I do that, it is just creating like yet another hola mundo. So instead of putting that, what we can do in here is that we can just go and say, and notice that we are using like the back quotes in here. So I can go and say listing dot title or something like that. Okay. So when I do that, then if I do this, now you can see it's showing up in there. Now I can take in one step, or one really big step further, which is going to be, we had this kind of template that we created in the HTML. So what I'm going to do is just paste that whole thing in there. Since I'm using these back quotes, then basically I can use like a multi-line like string basically. And then what I can start changing are the parts that contain the information I want. Like for instance, I can come in here and then just say, this is going to be the listing dot title or something. And again, if I do something like that, then now you can see I have my listing dot title in there. And I made this a mistake I made before. So I already created a listing called 6, so I can just get rid of that one and just use the article instead. That should help us creating like on the same size, so we are good at that point. And then you can just go and keep on changing the other ones. Now, there is one problem though, and it's that if I come in here and then I just say I want to put here the price, you can see here is my 120 and this element in there, and actually I want also the $sign. So one of the problems that you can find in here is that, well, it's going to be kind of messy to have to repeat the listing all the time. So one trick that you can do in here, I'm not remember if I did that in the other video that wasn't recorded properly, but you can go and say, you know what, let me use like object matching or object destructuring, I think is the way it is called in the MDN, object destructuring. So I can go and use the structuring just to go and take something like this. So I basically take an object and then I take the attributes. So that way I can go and define clearly that I want to take the price, the description, and then, I don't know, like the owner or the host or whatever. And in this case, what I'm going to say is that the host is John. Because if you remember, in our form, we actually don't have the host. So this allows us to go and set up what is going to be our default value for that. And with that, I can just come in here and then just start adding these default values. Like notice that the description, we are not using it yet. So I can go and just put that in here. There we go. Actually, Copilot is doing a great job in there. And then that is going to let me go and do this and then that and choose all of these elements. Okay. So what else do I need to do in there? I think this is everything I did up to that point. In the rest of the other video that was wrangled, or whatever you want to call it, I also just committed those submissions into this branch in here, the main branch. So you can see actually like the full commit, the basic listings for that, and then all of the HTML in there, and then the code that I think just wrote. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anything in there. Yes, I disaggregated that or destructured that. There is another trick in there that it's kind of important if you want to make sure that maybe you don't pass a parameter. You can just go and say that the default value for that is just going to be the empty object, which becomes very powerful for that. And with that, I think it's everything that you need for that module. I hope this helps and this time is not broken. Okay.